Morning, everyone. This is Congressman Mike Levin representing California's 49th District, North County, San Diego, and South Orange County. I'm so glad that you're joining us this morning and very grateful as this is now our 99th town hall since I started in office, if you can believe that, in January of 2019. So next month in June will be a big one. It will be town hall number 100. We host in-person, telephone, and virtual town halls for all of our constituents who wish to attend, and the different formats work well for different people. Really is an honor to serve you, and I look forward to continuing to fight for our district, for our community, for all of our residents in the California 49 for a long time to come. I'm hosting this virtual town hall along with my guest, Caitlin Yancey, the Associate Director of Government Affairs for Iraq and Afghanistan Veterans of America, or IAVA. Their mission is to connect, unite, and empower post-9/11 veterans, and Caitlin is going to speak with us in just a little bit about how the ongoing debt limit negotiations, which you probably have heard quite a bit about, may impact our veterans. But before I do that, I want to provide a quick recap of some of the recent work that we've been up to in the district. During the first week of May, I joined some of the local officials and the U.S. Army Corps of Engineers to announce that more than $40 million of federal funding that I secured will kickstart sand replenishment projects in Encinitas and in Solana Beach, as well as in San Clemente. We signed the project partnership agreements that will bring millions of cubic yards of sand to our beaches. And this is going to help reduce storm damage, of course, but it's also going to protect our coastline, improve safety, expand recreational benefits for the public, and vitally important, it will help protect the rail corridor connecting Los Angeles and San Diego. It's a multi-year process, but I'm very pleased that these are long-term contracts in place now with the Army Corps of Engineers for 50 years. And once the initial sand replenishment projects are finished in the near term, our entire district will benefit as a result. Earlier this month, I also hosted my congressional colleagues on the House Veterans Affairs Committee for a hearing. The Economic Opportunity Subcommittee that I chaired for the last 4 years. I now serve as the ranking member of that subcommittee. We did it at Miracosta College, and we talked about veteran homelessness, which is a critically important issue to me and to so many in our community. We heard from local leaders, from stakeholders, and members of the subcommittee learned about what it's actually going to take to end veteran homelessness. And I think we left with a better understanding of the policies that need to be created and changed to ensure that this happens. So as the ranking member of the subcommittee, I'm in a very fortunate position to be able to influence the legislation that will help homeless veterans get to stable, affordable housing and other benefits. But I have to tell you, I am deeply concerned by how these ongoing debt limit negotiations could impact them. I'll come back to that in just a minute. Here in Washington, D.C., Congress has been consumed with various issues that really impact all of us on a daily basis. The recent expiration of the Trump-era Title 42 order presents another hurdle in the ongoing immigration debate about how to welcome immigrants to our country while also maintaining border security and community safety. I've been at the border regularly. I met with Border Patrol personnel. In fact, just prior to this Zoom, I was on a different Zoom with some of our local representatives from CBP, Border Patrol, and FEMA. And I want to be clear, there are real issues at the border, and our immigration system, unfortunately, is broken. Border agents continue to be overwhelmed. The massive influx is unsustainable, and resources are very much strained. But we have to be realistic about this, and we've got to address these challenges with a multi-pronged approach that includes passing comprehensive immigration reform and providing our border agents with the resources that they need. And I am willing to work with any member of Congress, anyone, Republican, Democrat, doesn't matter to me, to try to move towards comprehensive reform and to try to find pragmatic solutions to our nation's immigration challenges. We've got to approach this entire issue with humanity, with compassion, and with determination to get results for the American people. Another issue that unfortunately continues to confront America and confronts the Congress is the issue of gun violence in our communities. We're witnessing mass shootings at a scale that has never before been seen. We've had more mass shootings this year than there have been days so far in the year, 2023. It's unacceptable. and we should not have to live like this. And one piece of legislation that I have tried to move on a bipartisan basis is called the Prevent Family Fire Act, which would provide a tax credit for firearm purchases, for the firearm storage device purchases that would hopefully lead to a lot more safe storage of our firearms. The Brady campaign has done a lot of research on this. And when you look at the rate of accidents for firearm use, it goes down dramatically, something like 70%, 75% when a firearm is safely stored and locked. So that's something I'm going to continue to advocate for. And so the bill that I'm working on really is a piece in a larger puzzle. We've got to do everything we can to tackle gun violence. We've got to try to prevent mass shootings, and we've got to ultimately keep kids safe. We are proposing numerous gun safety bills, and I'm proudly adding this legislation to provide that tax credit to the list. And now we need more Republicans to join us. We need more Republicans to join us to pass these common sense gun violence prevention bills. And the truth is that without any Republicans in Congress taking action, as long as they have the gavels, not much is going to get done around here. And that's deeply frustrating. So again, as is the case with immigration, I'm willing to work with any Republican on gun safety legislation. And I'm going to continue to have conversations on both sides of the aisle to try to garner support for our ideas around safe storage, but around other ideas as well. And the stakes are just too important for us not to act. So let's turn back for just a minute to the ongoing debt limit negotiations. I'm sure you've seen this being discussed literally every day on the news. And here's where things stand as of right now. House Republicans, led by Speaker McCarthy, recently passed their debt limit proposal, which we believe the best name for it is the Default on America Act, because that's exactly what it would do. In doing so, it would basically force an awful choice: hold our economy hostage, hurt Americans, including the veterans who have served our country so well, and eviscerate the progress that we've made combating the climate crisis. So what House Republicans seem to want is pretty simple. They're only willing to honor the nation's full faith and credit if Congress agrees to undo our successful work on climate change and other areas and slash important funding across the board, including for our veterans, by 22%. So we, House Democrats, stood united in opposition to this legislation, and we're not going to go back on our progress. Millions of Americans are counting on us to not leave them behind. So let me just be clear about this. If the 22% cut to the Department of Veterans Affairs budget were to become law, it would renege on our commitment that we've made, our solemn obligation to take care of those who fought to defend our country. It would slash $30 billion from veteran services. That means funding for housing vouchers for up to 50,000 homeless veterans would be eliminated. 50,000 homeless veterans. 81,000 jobs would be cut from across the Veterans Health Administration. It would mean fewer VA outpatient medical visits for 30 million veterans, including 524,000 California veterans, and an increase in wait times for benefits, pensions, life insurance, GI Bill, education, employment. All that would be potentially at risk. We cannot let our veterans down. We must not let our veterans down. And I, along with my colleagues on our side of the aisle, we will not support any proposal that catastrophically cuts veterans programs that millions of Americans rely on. And frankly, I won't support any cut to our veterans right now. I think that is simply the wrong thing to do. So ahead of the House vote on the Republicans' proposal, if you want to see how bad this really was, 24 veteran and military service organizations sent a letter urging Congress not to pass the Republican default bill. Republicans did it anyway. They're on the record voting to cut 22% across the board, including for our veterans. Now, I've heard some of them say, we didn't specifically include veterans in the bill. Well, they didn't specifically exclude them either. Therefore, veterans and veteran health care would be included in the bill. So Iraq and Afghanistan Veterans of America was one of the organizations, one of the 24 that signed that letter. And now I'm going to turn it over to Caitlin Yancey for her opening remarks. Caitlin, the floor is yours.
Good morning, and thank you so much, Representative Levin, for inviting me to participate in today's town hall. As previously stated, my name is Caitlin Yancey, and I am the Associate Director of Government Affairs for Iraq and Afghanistan Veterans of America, the largest nonprofit organization dedicated to the post 9/11 generation. And while that's our tagline, we like to make it known that we serve veterans of all eras and all discharge statuses. So it doesn't matter who you are or when you served, IAVA's got your back. Our community has seen many legislative wins in recent years, from the Deborah Sampson Act, which is a landmark piece of legislation focused on closing gaps in healthcare at VA for women veterans, to the Honoring Our Pact Act, the largest veterans healthcare expansion since the Mission Act, which provides healthcare and benefits to veterans exposed to toxic substances during service. There are a lot of conversations recently about the debt limit and how the Limit Save Grow Act will impact the veteran community. IAVA has serious concerns with both this bill and the appropriations bill passed out of the Milcon VA subcommittee earlier this week. If the proposed budget restrictions were applied across the board, the impacts would significantly affect delivery of care and benefits to veterans. The Veterans Benefit Administration would eliminate more than 6,000 staff, increasing the disability claims backlog by an estimated 134,000 claims, and forcing veterans and their surviving loved ones to wait longer for the benefits they have served, including pensions, life insurance, GI Bill educational support, and employment services. Additionally, outside of the VA budget, there is the issue of SNAP food benefits and Medicaid. 1.3 million veterans rely on SNAP food benefits. As someone that utilized both SNAP food benefits during my time in university while I was utilizing my GI Bill, and also utilized Medicaid for my son who had cancer at the time, these programs are instrumental and were a stepping stone into me being able to be the person that I am today. Our nation's veterans, caregivers, and survivors have already sacrificed too much. Our country must keep our promises and provide them with the best health care and benefits possible. We must ensure that VA is fully funded, including the PACT Act Toxic Exposure Fund, so that VA may fulfill President Lincoln's promise to care for those who have served our nation's military and for their families, caregivers, and survivors. Finally, I would be remiss if I did not mention IAVA's Quick Reaction Force. This is a comprehensive case management program. Veterans or military connected family members are able to call in 24/7, 365 and receive one-on-one assistance. This ranges from assistance accessing VA benefits, someone at risk of losing housing, mental health resources, or even if they need to talk to someone. It doesn't matter if it's Christmas Day at 3 a.m., a caller will reach a live person when dialing 855-91 Rapid. If they don't feel like talking and would rather fill out a form, they can go to quickreactionforce.org, fill out a form, and someone will get in touch with them within 48 hours. The current debt limit bill really concerns IAVA, and we really believe that there should be explicit protections for veteran funding moving forward. Thank you.
Well, thank you so much, Caitlin. I very much appreciate your comments and your leadership, and we're going to do everything we can to fight back against any cuts to VA healthcare, VA services. We now have a bunch of questions that were submitted online. We will get through as many of these as we can. And the first question comes from Vicky, who asks, have you been to the southern border in the last 6 months? And what happens now that Title 42 has expired? Well, thank you very much for your question, Vicky. Yes, I have, and I get to the border often. I was just there in March, and I met with a number of CBP and Border Patrol folks. And the situation down there is challenging. Title 42, I think, as has widely been reported, ended recently. It was a pandemic era public health order. And with the end of the public health emergency, so ended Title 42. So we're going to return to processing migrants under Title 8. That was what was in place before Title 42 and in the COVID-19 pandemic, and what is in place now. And in some ways, it is more restrictive than Title 42. It imposes criminal penalties for those, for example, who are seeking asylum illegally. So I think that we have to take a step back. We've got to acknowledge that the immigration system is broken and that we've got to focus on comprehensive reform. And that's been talked about in Washington for quite some time. We got close. I say we, my predecessors got close around 2013. So it's been a decade since we really had a comprehensive bipartisan deal that was in the works. But even at the end of last year, there was discussion about providing a pathway to citizenship for a couple million of our Dreamers, our DACA recipients, in exchange for some other border security measures. And that ultimately was derailed at the last minute by Mitch McConnell. Why he did that? Well, the reporting anyway has been that he didn't want to give President Biden a perceived win on immigration. And the reality is, so long as we've got people on the other side of the aisle in particular who see the issue of immigration as something to campaign on rather than a challenge that needs to be solved collectively for the greater good of the United States, then we're not going to get anywhere. So I would implore my colleagues on both sides of the aisle, continue those discussions. As I've said, I will work with anybody, Republican or Democrat, that's willing to talk and work in a common sense approach towards all of this. The last thing I'll say is that you would not know this unless you read my Wikipedia, but my grandparents on my mom's side were immigrants from Mexico. My mom's parents came to this country when they were quite young. They didn't have any formal education. They didn't have any money, didn't speak English when they got here, but they had this incredible belief that in the United States, they'd have better opportunity than they had in Mexico. It's the same thing that drove my great-grandparents on my dad's side from Eastern Europe. And I think my family's story and the story of so many families across the country where my grandparents came with nothing and their kids went to college and now their youngest grandson is a member of the United States House. That's how it's supposed to work in the United States of America. That's what makes us exceptional. And we've got to get back to some common sense when it comes to our immigration policies. The next question comes from Denny. Denny asks, my understanding is that there have been recent discussions about the possibility of getting rid of the spent nuclear fuel at Songs. Can you give us an update? Well, thank you for the question, Denny, and you are right. In fact, there are some new updates around Songs, and I'm really quite excited about the next steps. As I think everybody knows, I've been working very hard since coming to Congress in 2019 to get the nuclear waste off our beach as quick and as safe as we can. It's challenging because the waste at Songs is really the symptom of a far larger problem. The larger problem is that we've got nowhere in the United States to send any of our nation's spent nuclear fuel. And that, unfortunately, has been the case for some time. In 1987, the federal government declared Yucca Mountain in Nevada as the only site that could take spent nuclear fuel. They did so really without the consent of Nevada. They did so on the basis of scientific and technical merit rather than the political will. And so in 2009, that project was discontinued. What we need now is another site or sites that actually consent to having spent nuclear fuel moved in an interim fashion. I wrote a recent op-ed for the San Diego Union Tribune that we've got linked on our website. I encourage you to check it out. But the DOE has been a great partner here, and I give Secretary Granholm a ton of credit in being very pragmatic and working with our office. Over the last 3 years, we've been able to get $93 million through the House appropriations process for the DOE to restart a consent-based nuclear waste policy. And they'll be announcing, hopefully very soon, sites across the country that will qualify for the first round of funding who are interested in exploring spent nuclear fuel in their community, again, on a consent basis, eyes wide open, knowing full well the costs and the benefits. But I'm encouraged by this. This is greater progress than we've had in many years. And I give all credit to the great team working on this, including my great staff and also the folks at DOE. The next question comes from Steve. What are you doing to address gun violence? And what are you doing to reach out to the other side to engage them in dialogue? Well, Steve, thank you for that question. And I can tell you, as the father of two young children, seeing incidents, Uvalde comes to mind as one that was just truly heartbreaking, and the overwhelming frustration knowing that Congress has failed to live up to its responsibilities to take action on gun violence prevention when the overwhelming majority of the American people expect us to do that. I am encouraged that last year we did pass something called the Bipartisan Safer Communities Act. It's the biggest gun violence bill we've had since 1994, when Congress passed a 10-year assault weapons ban. Unfortunately, it was allowed to expire in 2004 by President George W. Bush. But the Bipartisan Safer Communities Act is a good bill. tightens up some background checks. It increases age requirements in some instances, but doesn't go far enough. Doesn't go far enough. And the reality is that I support a whole host of measures to prevent gun violence, but I'm always trying to find, as you correctly point out in your question, the areas of common ground. And one area I continue to believe is very ripe for legislation is safe storage, just safely storing that firearm. When my son and daughter go to a friend's house, we always ask of the other family, are firearms in the home? And if so, are they safely stored? Question as simple as that, we know could prevent so much gun violence. But a tax credit where manufacturers and retailers and customers are more inclined to have safe storage devices become the new normal, I think is very welcome and would dramatically reduce gun-related accidents in the home and elsewhere. All right, I'm going to turn to Caitlin for some questions. Caitlin's been waiting patiently. Next question comes from Ron. Will the debt limit situation be resolved before June 1st? And what will happen to my savings if not? I'll let you start there. And I presume that Ron is a veteran.
I don't think that we can fully predict if the debt limit will be resolved by June 1st. I know that both sides of the aisle are hoping that it is. Obviously, it is very concerning if it is not resolved by June 1st, as the Treasury Department has told us that we will default on loans if that does not happen. I don't know that I can speak fully to your personal savings. I don't have a lot of educational training when it comes to personal accounts, but it is very concerning if they don't resolve this by that June 1st deadline.
Well, let me just add for Ron's savings, I am hearing from economists and from a lot of public reporting as well that the potential impact of a default would be a job loss of 7 to 9 million jobs, and that you could see the stock market go down by a quarter or even a third. Deeply problematic. And kind of what's on the table right now, I'm encouraged to see the president have a couple of people who are negotiating on his behalf. And Speaker McCarthy has someone negotiating on his, happens to be a friend of mine from Baton Rouge, Louisiana, Garrett Graves, my colleague from the House Natural Resources Committee. And they are hopefully going to come to some sort of an agreement that does not involve draconian cuts to veteran healthcare and veteran services. But that is a ways off because we're still pretty far away on some of the other deal points. They want 10 years worth of budget caps. We've talked about maybe 2 years worth. They want to use all the unspent COVID money and be able to repurpose that. That's probably an area of common ground. They want to be able to have very significant across-the-board cuts to all sorts of programs and services in their default act that we won't go for, the rolling back of IRA tax credits and so forth. We won't go for any of that. They'd like to see a permitting reform proposal that's basically a laundry list for the fossil fuel industry. We'd like to see a permitting reform proposal that will actually help accelerate the deployment of clean and sustainable power generation. So there's a pretty big, I think it's fair to say there's a pretty big disconnect. They even want more restrictive work requirements for some of our most important social safety net programs out there, SNAP, as mentioned, temporary assistance for needy families. And for a variety of reasons, we don't support those objectives. We do, however, acknowledge, understand that we've got to try as best we can to come to some sort of common ground here. There are a couple of backup options as well. One is called a discharge petition. We're working on that right now. It's a bit of a long shot, but we're working on that. And another is the president using the 14th Amendment. There are some challenges around that, but at least in theory, the president could use the 14th Amendment to try to address the debt limit problem as well. There are big problems with both the 14th Amendment and the discharge petition. So the best outcome is a bipartisan deal. Next question for you, Caitlin, is from John. Please tell us how the debt ceiling proposals will impact veterans and vulnerable Americans. What will happen in the Senate? Maybe your crystal ball is clearer than mine.
Again, I don't know that we can fully predict what will happen in the Senate. I know that Senator Tester, the chairman of the Senate Veteran Affairs Committee, has stated that he opposes the bill, and that's what I know as of now, as well as Senator Schumer, the leader in the Senate. So them opposing this bill definitely gives us hope that there is more room for negotiation and change to ensure that veterans' benefits are protected. But again, kind of like you said, I don't have a crystal ball in front of me, so I can't fully predict what is going to happen. Again, we are very concerned that this won't pass by June 1st. And so oftentimes when we're in this sort of risky situation, people make concessions to make sure that we can pay our bills on time. I mean, we as Americans do the same thing just to ensure that we can make sure our bills are paid on time, and the American government often does the same thing. So that doesn't exclude the fact that IAVA and many other veteran service organizations are going to continue to press for those explicit protections so that VA funding does not receive that cut. Additionally, kind of like both Congressman Levin and myself stated, there is an estimated 22% cut across all VA programs. There was an appropriation bill passed out of the Milcon VA subcommittee earlier this week that claims to fully fund VA. And while we're very encouraged by the amounts for certain program funding, there are definitely concerns. There is a significant amount of reduction when it comes to funding the Toxic Exposure Fund, which for anyone familiar with the PACT Act, this is where the PACT Act money comes from, is from this specific fund, which was created to ensure and make these funds mandatory so that veterans can make sure that they are going to receive those healthcare and benefits that they deserve. So and that was underfunded by 3/4. VA asked for $20 billion, and the appropriation bill only sets aside a little over $5 billion. So we're seeing more and more veterans come to VA since PACT Act passed. I believe it's 17. We've seen 17,000 women veterans enroll at VA since PACT. That is a very amazing amount for someone who's advocated for women veterans to utilize these services. So we're very concerned, as you know, this 22% cut is kind of has been passed out of the House, and we're waiting to see what the Senate is going to do. So that's just a little bit of what could cause an issue outside of the comments already made.
Well, Caitlin is right on point. And my concern is, you know, over the last 4+ years, we have worked in a bipartisan way for our veterans, but talk is cheap. Actions count more than words. And the fact that they want to cut the Toxic Exposure Fund and really undermine the implementation of the PACT Act as a result is directly contradictory to their public comments. So it's one thing for them to say we support veterans, but another matter entirely to fund the programs that we all have worked together to bring into law. The other option, since we were talking about the Senate, would be a potential deal to do a discharge petition. And so let me explain what that is for just a minute. So basically, the House Democrats could bring a clean debt limit bill to the floor. And we could do it if we got 218 signatures on a petition from members that would then discharge that bill to be considered for a vote by the full House. If the bill were to pass the House, it would then go to the Senate. And Mitch McConnell at that point, again, this is definitely a long shot because it contradicts his public statements. He could then waive the filibuster rule and allow a majority of the House to vote, or if a majority of the House were to vote in favor of that clean debt limit increase, it would then it would go to the president. Now, that's a bit of a long shot, but that's also what Mitch McConnell did a few years ago when we resolved this issue the last time, is he allowed the Senate to vote on the debt limit by a simple majority vote. He waived the filibuster rule, which would require at least 60 senators to vote in the affirmative. I bring all this up because we're watching what McConnell does very, very closely. And in order to get a discharge petition past the House, you would need to get 5 Republican House members to vote for it, along with every House Democrat, which we would vote for it. In any event, we're going to do everything we can to prevent default. Default is not an option, and these massive cuts to veterans, that is not an option. So we're just going to keep at it, Caitlin. It's not easy, but we've got to come to a solution here. Here's the next question from Petty. If there is no resolution to the debt ceiling, will Social Security payments stop?
So from my conversations, they very well could. And additionally, on top of Social Security payments, Medicare payments could stop, as well as veterans benefit payments could stop. So this would not just impact Social Security, but also many American citizens that are relying on these types of payments.
I am also concerned about things like funding for national security, for NORAD, for some of our most sensitive programs and personnel. We're in uncharted territory here. This has never happened before. We've always met our obligations. Our full faith and credit has never been compromised. Even when we came close over a decade ago, that had a very negative effect on the economy. And as I said, if this were to happen, we're talking 7 to 9 million jobs lost and potential of a quarter to a third drop in the value of the markets. And we can't allow that to happen. Next question, I will answer the next one. It comes from Kendra, who asks, what are you doing to support Ukraine? And will you vote for additional funding for the war? Well, Kendra, I support very consistently military and humanitarian support for Ukraine. I think it's so critically important to realize that what happens in Ukraine is not just about Ukraine. It is about the entire free world. And whether we will have a rules-based international order where democracy prevails, or whether we're going to allow authoritarianism and dictatorship to prevail. That's the fundamental struggle. And that's what Ukraine is really all about. It's not just about Russia and Ukraine. It's about what happens in Taiwan, what happens in the Middle East, what happens all around the world. So United States leadership still has to matter in the world. We can't expect others to follow if we aren't willing to lead. We can't expect others to embrace democracy if we aren't willing to lead. So that's why it's so critically important for me. And I'm encouraged that we still have broad bipartisan support. There are a few voices of different opinion on the fringes, but overwhelmingly, we as the Congress support what we're trying to do with our partners, which is to prevent Putin from running roughshod over a democratic Ukraine. And we will continue to fund the efforts there for as long as it takes. And I believe that's a broad bipartisan opinion. And I think of my grandfather who fought in World War II and how he fought tyranny and fought fascism in Nazi Germany. And I know that his generation, the greatest generation, if my grandfather were still living, I know that that's what he would be fighting for as well, to fight tyranny, fight oppression, stand for democracy, and stand up for the rules-based international order that has been the standard ever since he fought in World War II. Thank you for the question. Next is from Melissa. Melissa asks, can you talk about your new bill with Representative Sean Casten, the Clean Electricity and Transmission Acceleration Act? How can permitting reform be implemented without doing away with environmental protections? Melissa, thank you for the question. So Sean Casten and I came to Congress together in 2019. He and I both had a background in clean energy. We're the only two members of Congress that we know of who actually ran on clean energy policy as one of the key reasons we wanted to serve in Congress. We were both appointed to the Select Committee on the Climate Crisis. And as a result of the hard work of that committee and the other committees in the House, in the last Congress, we were able to pass the Inflation Reduction Act, which included over $370 billion worth of support for climate change policies, for actually dealing with the climate crisis with the seriousness that we know science demands. And so we're talking about dramatic reduction in greenhouse gas emission across the board, from the cars we drive and the buildings we build, the food we grow, the electricity that we consume. And I'm so encouraged by all that progress. But there is one missing piece of this, which is for us to fully unlock the potential of the Inflation Reduction Act to fully build out the modern electric grid that we're going to need as we electrify and decarbonize all facets of our economy. We're going to need to build big projects, multi-gigawatt, multi-state projects a lot quicker. And what that is going to require is permitting reform. That's what I understand when I hear the terms permitting reform. I'll give you an example. Professor Jesse Jenkins of Princeton, brilliant guy, he identified 1,280 gigawatts worth of projects that are stuck, where developers have proposed them, but they are stuck because of the bureaucracy. And those are solar projects, wind projects, battery storage projects all across the United States. To give you a sense of 1,280 gigawatts, the entire California, state of California electric load or usage consumption is around 50 to 60 gigawatts. So we're talking 1,280 gigawatts that are stuck. We're going to need to build probably 700 or 800 gigawatts worth of that in the coming years to meet our greenhouse gas reduction goals. But right now, things are stuck. For example, there was a project that recently got the green light after 18 years to connect Wyoming wind power through to California and the West. 18 years for 3 gigawatts. We need to get projects like that built far more rapidly. That's what our bill is designed to do. So we have this clean energy transmission acceleration bill that I think has a great deal of support within the Democratic caucus, and I hope would have support among Republicans as well. Because as we've looked at the Inflation Reduction Act and a lot of the investments that have been announced subsequent to the passage of that bill, roughly 2/3 of those announcements are actually in red states where they're seeing the economic opportunity of building out solar or wind or battery storage or the manufacturing to support those different sorts of electricity. And ultimately ought to be good for everybody, not just for our environment, but for our economy as well. What we don't need, and what others seem to, in some areas, seem to think of as permitting reform, they're just thinking of giveaways for the oil, gas, and coal companies to make it easier to build oil and gas and coal, but no easier to build solar, wind, or storage. So I want to have an accelerated transition to a clean energy future. Unfortunately, a lot of my colleagues on the other side want to double down on the dirty energy policies of the past rather than embracing the clean energy policies of the future. That's going to be a key consideration as we move forward with this debt limit discussion. So, final question comes from Bonnie. Bonnie writes, I have lived at Grandview Beach in Encinitas for 24 years. This has been the only year we've had no sand. What are you doing about sand replenishment and protecting our coast? As I said, Bonnie, this year, finally, we are kickstarting the efforts with the Army Corps of Engineers. This is something that people have been waiting for a very long time. 50 years worth of sand replenishment. It'll dramatically impact our entire coastline in our district in the coming years and decades. And we've got to do it for the protection of our bluffs, for coastal erosion, for our recreation, for our safety. We know, obviously, we had a tragedy at Grandview not too many years ago, and we've got to do all we can to protect our coastline. And our rail corridor, again, so important. The rail corridor connecting LA and San Diego is the second busiest in the entire United States. Northeast corridor #1, our corridor #2, LA to San Diego. 8 million passengers a year. But even more perhaps important to our economy than the 8 million passengers a year is $1 billion a year of economic impact on our region from that rail corridor. So if it shuts down for a month, you do the math. That's $100 million that it costs our regional economy. So we can't allow that to happen. And every year we throw Band-Aids on it to try to prevent the near-term closures. But over time, we've got to consider relocating parts of the corridor, particularly the parts most at risk. Parts like in Del Mar on the bluffs, San Clemente, where the beaches have eroded to the point there's no more beach in some places. These are areas that we've got to consider relocation. So I'm doing all I can in addition to funding the near-term sand replenishment, funding the near-term stabilization measures for the corridor, also helping to fund the long-term planning, engineering, design, and eventually the long-term construction for relocation of the most sensitive and at-risk parts of our corridor. And I won't stop till the job is done. These are not easy issues. Some of the things we've talked about today, whether it's our nuclear waste on our beach, whether it's our rail corridor connecting two of the major population centers in the country, in LA and in San Diego, or whether it's the issue of veteran homelessness. Trying to address these is going to take time, but it's worth the fight. And I'm convinced that when we work together, we can still do big things. And that's what I'm going to keep doing, is working to do big things every day. So with that, those are great questions. Really appreciate all those questions. And I want to thank you all for tuning in. I really, really want to thank Caitlin for her work, for her advocacy on behalf of our veterans. We are so thrilled to be working with you and look forward to hopefully a resolution to this debt limit that doesn't impact our veterans in a negative way, doesn't impact our military families in a negative way. We've got to keep fighting for common sense. And in closing, I want to just say, if you want to share an opinion with us, perhaps you had a question or you after hearing this have a question, you can email me. You can visit our website. It's just Levin, my last name, Levin, .house.gov. My office is also here to help you with any issues that you or your family might be having with the federal agency. And my office, they do such a great job working for our entire community. Whether it's the Department of Veterans Affairs, whether it's Social Security, the IRS, please don't hesitate to reach out to our office if we can be of help. You can call us at 760-599-5000. That number again, 760-599-5000. So with that, thank you so much for joining us. We'll look forward to seeing you at our 100th Town Hall next month. Thanks, everyone.